Welcome to the Boom Clap podcast where culture and conviction collide. I'm your host, Rita Rogers. It's 2026. It's our first episode together since the new year. I took a few weeks off to celebrate Christmas and just spend the holidays with family, and we're back. It was a busy holiday season. I don't know about you guys, but I felt like, I really enjoy that lull between Christmas and New Year's, and I usually feel like I get a really good amount of time to just sit on the couch for a few days, reading a book, drinking too much coffee. And I don't really feel like I got that this year. It feels like it just flew by. Could be partially or wholly because I have a toddler boy. That could be the culprit there, but it just felt so fast this year and fast paced. So it didn't really feel like a huge break, but it was still a really good Christmas and really nice. I just love Christmas Day. I love the fact that there feels like there's no outside obligation. Like no one should really need you for anything that day, work-wise or anything like that. It's just like a day to celebrate Christmas and Christ and the blessings that God has given you and just be with your family. And I just love that feeling of slowing down and just settling in and shutting off all the noise and feeling like it's really okay to do that. So anyway, new year, new fresh start to the podcast this year. I have some really good episodes, I think, in line coming up for you guys. Today, we're going to talk mostly about, there's so much stuff going on in the world, but one of the big things happening is many changes through the Department of Health and Human Services at the level of the CDC. There are many changes happening. And so we're going to talk about those. I pulled in many, sorry, Andy, but many clips for you guys to kind of unpack what people are saying. Some of this stuff seems celebratory and straightforward, but there's still a need to talk about what it actually means for you, what it looks like going to the doctor's office, if you visit a pediatrician or anything like that going forward with these new recommendations. And maybe some other things that need to happen going forward. So anyway, we're going to talk mostly about that. That's going to be the bulk of our conversation, but there's a few other things I want to talk about as well. We'll get to before we talk about the CDC. But just to start also, I want to thank you guys for continuing to be here, to listen to the podcast, to support the podcast by way of sharing it, by leaving reviews. You guys gifted me a huge gift at the end of the year by leaving me some new reviews, some written reviews on Apple. I really appreciate that. It helps push the podcast out to new listeners. Like I said, at the end of the year, we have a few people slowly trickling over to YouTube. That's still a really small portion of our listenership. But even if you listen there, you can go to Apple and leave a written review there. If you listen on Spotify, you can still leave a written review on Apple. You can leave a 5-star on Spotify. That's all you can do at this point is leave stars. But you can comment on Spotify and you can comment on YouTube. You can like the video there. And those things all help flag these platforms that you guys are listening, you're engaged with the episodes, and that they should tell more people about Boom Clap Podcast. So anyway, really appreciate that. I'm counting on you guys to keep sharing and spreading the word about the podcast because, as you know, life is really busy for all of us. And I've been on social media a little bit less. And I have written more articles this year, though, on my website. So I don't know. I just feel more of a pull to long form content lately. And like the sound bites just aren't getting us that far. So podcasting and blogging, writing articles just feels so much more fulfilling. So having you guys able to help me share is just so appreciated. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about before we get to the CDC stuff, I just want to touch on how I would like to move forward this year and how I would like to promote for you guys to also think about moving forward. Just resisting taking on the cultural chaos as a way of life in the new year. That's something that's been ringing in my head. Like, how do we just say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take on this chaos that I see online, because like we talked about towards the end of the year, it feels almost, I think this was on the episode I did with Cecily, it feels like, I don't even think it feels like, I think this is very true, that there's this life we live in public, like our real life. And yes, we're feeling some of the implications of the things going on politically and culturally, but it's not like overbearing or chaotic or making our lives like feel this overwhelming amount of anxiety. And then you go online and it's just like bombardment of all the things happening in the world. And oftentimes we're seeing multiple people saying the same thing, and it's just like bombarded with it. And so that's what I'm talking about, is just like not taking on that cultural chaos, shutting it off, and maybe focusing more on the things that build our foundation. So we do this by reading the Bible, taking on God's word before we get into the written word of the headlines, or the spoken, video clips of headlines, listening to sermons that help build that foundation, that help us understand more theologically the Bible and God's word, studying history, building a historical foundation, understanding things so that when we see online or told things online, we can help ourselves sort through these things a little bit easier. And this is including health. There's a lot of content on health online that's kind of like pushing you towards these better, healthier lifestyles, which is good. But some people are taking this on to an extreme where it's not healthy. And so if we just have a foundation in every aspect of our life, we can pull from that and we can more easily make decisions, and we can avoid feeling really anxious or overwhelmed by the things that we're seeing in the world, and not have to shield ourselves completely from it. We can still go online and not feel like we're going to be overwhelmed because we have a foundation, and we can just be like, no, I'm going to resist this anxiety. I'm going to resist this overwhelm. So that's kind of my goal going forward for you guys. And I think that most of the episodes that I have laid out, or the things that I have written down that I want to talk about, really are anchored to that, whether it's health and healthcare discussions, or discussions around faith. All of these things are trying to anchor us to a foundation. The other thing is, I think a lot of us trick ourselves when we go online, just to stay here a little bit longer. I think a lot of us tend to trick ourselves into thinking that we are, quote unquote, doing something about the things that we care about, be it government overreach, government spending, cultural issues, just by consuming the media. And don't get me wrong, it is very good to help promote the voices that are pushing good messages out into the world by way of sharing their content or liking their content. That is good and helpful, but we need not be tricked into thinking we're doing something just by going online. Because sometimes I think that overwhelm doesn't necessarily come from what we're seeing, but it comes from this subconscious feeling or knowing that we're not really doing anything. We're just being passive about things that we know are important. So I think, like Cecily had talked about in that last episode that we did together before splitting and going our separate ways as far as a podcast goes, on going local. Sometimes it feels better, rather than being online consuming content, just to be local and doing something about the things we care about, actually hands-on. So resist taking on the cultural chaos as a way of life in the new year. That's a good word for today. If you get nothing else from this podcast, that's something right there. Okay, so Bible, being in our word. This is how I'm doing the Bible this year. Well, that's not the only way. I will be just like reading my Bible regularly and doing some deep dives into it. But my daily reading, as far as Bible in the year goes, I love Bible recap. I love chronological reading. But I know this year I cannot handle being in the Old Testament and having like a reading plan and looking up and going to different places and like studying from a chronological perspective right now, but just with a toddler, that's not going to work for me. And conversely, I tried this a couple years ago and I felt discombobulated reading from the Old and New Testament at the same time. But so far, I'm like a week and a half in, and this feels like it's going to be the best option for me this year. So if you don't know this is an option, this is the Everyday Bible, and there are different versions of this, but I will link, or Casey will link this one in the show notes for you. But it's the Everyday Bible. It's 365 readings through the whole Bible. So it's Bible in a year. It's not chronological though. It goes through every day. You're reading something from the Old Testament, the New Testament, Psalms, and Proverbs. So it's just written where you just flip to the next page every day. So it's very simple. So like January 1, and this is ESV version, but January 1, you're going to read from Genesis. You're going to read from Matthew. You're going to read Psalm 1, and then you're going to read some from Proverbs. So by the end of the year, you have read the entire Bible and Psalms twice, I believe. So I think I'm actually going to do this. I'll try to do it a little bit quicker where I can get through in 7 to 8 months. Because the readings it feels a little bit easier than doing a chronological reading. Not that we're going for easy when reading the Bible, but it gets you in the Word, and you're not just in the Old Testament, which can be really heavy if you've ever done it that way. So anyway, if you want to start this with me, you're not going to be too far behind. You could probably get caught up pretty easy. We will link that. All right, outside of just that basic, like how we're going to get into the new year, how we're going to live this year, how we want to feel going forward into the new year, and what we want to put our focus on. The other political, cultural thing I want to talk about is Tax Revolt. We're going to get to the CDC. We're going to get to vaccines. That will be the bulk of the conversation. But Tax Revolt. So Marjorie Taylor Greene had posted on Twitter, almost every Trump voter I see on X is so fed up they are planning a 2026 tax revolt, and rightfully so. It's because Americans work their butts off, barely make ends meet, and the government consistently gives their hard-earned tax dollars to foreign countries, foreign wars, and foreigners the U.S. government has brought and allowed into America. And nothing is given to Americans. We have nearly $40 trillion in debt, unaffordable healthcare, unaffordable housing, and the dollar loses value every day. Meanwhile, the government, no matter which party is in charge, screws over Americans. What will it take to put the American people first? And so a lot I want to say about this. The first thing I want to say is I want to pull out the sentence as, and nothing is given to Americans. I mean, I understand this as like a contrast that nothing is given to Americans compared to what we give to other countries. It's fine to use it in that manner, but I just have trouble with this sentence under the presumption that the government is supposed to be giving us something, because the government isn't here to hand us anything. We're paying the government, and anything that is given back to us or given to us is just given back to us and redistributed. So maybe taking something from somebody else in order to give to us. So I don't like the idea that the government should be giving us anything. The government is not there for the purpose of giving Americans anything or making healthcare affordable or anything like that, at least by the ways that the typical American thinks of the government being able to make healthcare affordable. So the tax revolt, I find it a very interesting thing. And actually, I think it was the episode maybe we did about the elections with Stand for Health Freedom about just like voting and all of that, that I had like, I feel like I even got quiet when I said it, like, can I say this? The only way to fix things is Americans not paying taxes. And I'm like finding out people are tweeting. I'm like, apparently you can say it. You just can't actually do it without facing a penalty. But several months ago, when people were complaining about the price of beef and heavily complaining about the price of groceries again, I was thinking about this, and I was like talking to my husband, and I said, a lot of times people complain about the price of beef. They complain about the price of groceries, the cost of living, the cost of housing, but they don't complain about their tax bill. And it just kind of blows my mind. I'm like, why? Like, and then President Trump gets up there and he's like, we're going to import beef from Argentina. And I'm like, okay, why? Instead of complaining about the price of beef, which we're not going to get into all that, but instead of complaining about that, why not complain about our tax bills? Because that is the root of the problem. Okay. So they complain about the money we're sending to Israel or foreign countries and foreign wars, but we don't much talk about the money that we're first sending to Washington, or that the government takes from us either by way of taxes or by way of inflation through printing and borrowing. And so I find that very interesting. And so when Marjorie Taylor Greene posted this, I'm initially like, yes, that's great. But I have more to say about that, because on top of the fact that we don't complain about taxes as much, most people don't pay their taxes in a lump sum the way that small businesses pay. It's just taken directly out of their paycheck. And then, this time of year, it starts being tax season and people start celebrating that they're getting a refund after essentially loaning the government their money for an entire year. And so not only do we not complain about taxes enough, people celebrate that they've loaned the government money and they're getting a refund and what they're going to do with their refund. So anyway, initially I'm like, yes, this is great. Tax Revolt, let's talk about this. But at the same time, I'm like, this is a total pipe dream and it's not going to happen. It's just fun to talk about, fun to tweet about, gets a lot of traction on Twitter, but it's not going to happen for several reasons. The first reason is the average American is really, really good at talking a big game and then backing down. Like, so good at that, especially since we have an online presence, or after the social media thing kind of caught traction. People like go on there and talk this big game and then back down. And my biggest example about that is, remember COVID, okay? No jail time attached, just losing your job, potentially losing your job for not taking the vaccine. And how many people were willing to do that? Not very many. And this is all while there are many, many jobs, because many, many people don't want to work. Like, you would go, I remember during that time, like, you could go to restaurants after COVID and people just didn't have staff. They couldn't seat their full restaurant because they didn't have staff. People didn't want to work. There were jobs aplenty. So if you lost a job, you could easily find something at least to cover the bills. And people were so afraid of losing their jobs. So do you think most Americans, or enough Americans to make an impact, are going to participate in a tax revolt where there's actually like a penalty attached, a fine, or even jail time? Probably not. So that's my first point. And the second reason is that, like I said before, most taxes are taken directly out of a paycheck. People don't pay in a lump sum. So there's really not any way, by design, there's not really any way to just say, I'm not paying my taxes. Because yes, you could say, I'm going to take an exemption, but part of your taxes are Social Security. Part of them are Medicare taxes. And so those things are automatically taken out. You can get an exemption for your actual income tax to the federal government. But from my understanding, it's not actually legal to get an exemption, even if you have the intent of paying in a lump sum, unless you can prove that you do not have a high enough income to have to pay taxes at the end of the year. So without that, there would be penalties attached, and also, if you're not paying, possible jail time. So I don't know. That video keeps coming to mind during COVID also, where these people are sitting on an airplane and they announce that the masking measures are going to be lifted and people don't have to mask anymore. And literally people like rip off their masks and they're waving them on the airplane. And I'm like, okay, people are ripping off their mask and waving them and cheering. So that shows you that these people didn't want to be masking. They were only masking because somebody told them to. And so you have people like that in America who have proved what their principles are, who have proved that they're willing to just listen to the government. And I just say, yeah, right, when I hear people are going to participate in a tax revolt. Maybe a few people will, but and it would be good maybe if some people in the media did. I think Savannah Hernandez is her name. I think she said she was going to do it this year. And she's somebody in the media that could maybe do this and show, have something to show for it as far as journalism goes. But I just see this being a pipe dream, a nice dream, but a pipe dream. So I think the best thing we can do is start hammering on, first and foremost, the fact that our government takes money from us. And it's essentially taking a portion of our life because we have to work for that money that we're automatically owed to the government. So we're owing the government a portion of our time working for the government, and then they're like basically confiscating our money to redistribute it to other countries, to other Americans, or their pet projects. And so we need to be pushing for lawmakers to be held accountable, voting lawmakers out who aren't doing a good job with this, and also fighting against these silly battles that are currently going on against actually fiscally responsible lawmakers and politicians like Rand Paul. Like, I see Trump attacking him online and things. I'm just like, I don't know. Rand Paul, in my opinion, is pretty much tried and true. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. All right, let's move on to the main soapbox for today. The CDC vaccine schedule has changed. We'll discuss that. The hepatitis B recommendations have changed. That was changed a little bit before the schedule, and that kind of goes hand in hand, but there are a few separate things we can talk about. All right, outside of the vaccine changes and the vaccination schedule changes, one thing that's not getting as much airtime is the HHS is barring hospitals from performing sex-rejecting procedures on children. And they're using this language. It's one of the important things that I want to bring up when we talk about this. They're using this language. They're saying, they're not saying gender affirming care, which is the typical language that places use when they talk about this. They're saying sex rejecting procedures. They're saying we're not allowing you to change the way a person was made, essentially. And they're not calling it something fluffy. They're calling it what it is. And I think that's really important. And the second part I want to really note about this is they're doing this by tying it to Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements. So hospitals are reimbursed by CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, for their services rendered. So say they do open heart on a patient that is on Medicare, Medicare will reimburse them for the service that they provided to that patient. And historically, the CMS has made hospitals do certain things, or required them to meet certain standards in order to receive these reimbursements. And so they are using their reimbursements to make sure that hospitals do not provide this quote unquote sex rejecting procedure for children. And I think this is a really important thing that's not getting enough airtime right now, because this, don't get me wrong, the CDC schedule, that's important, the vaccine schedule, but this is equally important. I'll read just a little bit from this. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services today announced a series of proposed regulatory actions to carry out President Trump's executive order directing HHS to end the practice of sex-rejecting procedures on children that expose young people to irreversible harm. These procedures include pharmaceutical or surgical interventions of specified types that attempt to align a child's physical appearance or body with an asserted identity different from their sex. So asserted identity. That's important as well, because they're not saying like, this is the child's identity. You know, they're saying this is their asserted identity. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services will release a notice of proposed rulemaking to bar hospitals from performing sex-rejecting procedures on children under age 18 as a condition of participation in Medicare and Medicaid programs. Nearly all U.S. hospitals participate in Medicare and Medicaid, yes, and this action is designed to ensure that the U.S. government will not be in business with organizations that intentionally or unintentionally inflict permanent harm on children. Okay, so that's really important. Historically, like I said, CMS has tied things to Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements. And another thing that didn't get a whole lot of airtime that involved Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements within hospitals was the fact that that RFK, or CMS through RFK's direction, decoupled the flu mandates with Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements. That's one thing that I think a lot of people don't really understand, even within the hospital realm. And we've talked about it a lot here. So if you've been listening for a long time, you know that it's because of Healthy People 2020 and the fact that hospitals knew this was coming that they started mandating the flu shot to their staff. So essentially, the hospital was telling staff that they were to take the flu shot to help protect their patients. But the only initiator for making staff start taking the vaccine was it's tied to Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements. So essentially they're telling you to protect their patients and protect the hospital patients that you're around. But the reality is it was to protect the hospital's bottom line by making staff take a medical product. So essentially you were making a medical decision in order to allow your hospital to continue being paid for their services. So you were making medical decisions under false conditions. So those are two really good things. Good use of tying Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements, and good use of untying Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements. How I'm taking care of my body, my nutrition, how I am doing food and eating and nutrition throughout the week is a huge factor in how I feel. My protein intake, I can correlate with how I feel. I'm finding it hard, though, to get enough protein if I'm not incorporating a protein powder at least a few times a week. I like eating whole foods the most, but I need to add some protein powder occasionally just when I'm on the go and busy. And Equip Foods is how I do that. You can use the code Rita15 to get 15% off of any of their products, but I specifically like their Prime protein powder. I really like the unflavored version. It is a single ingredient. It is a very hard to find single ingredient products anymore outside of just like whole foods you buy at the grocery store. And this is a single ingredient product without added sweeteners. I love it. You can get flavors though. They do have flavors for anybody who wants that. And I'm sure those are great as well. But I really like the unflavored version of their Prime protein. They also have colostrum. They have colostrum powders rather, and liver capsules. They have all kinds of beef-based supplements that can help you meet your nutrition needs. So go to equipfoods.com/Rita15 or use the code Rita15 and click the link in our show notes to get yourself some Prime protein. All right, so onto the vaccine schedule. The communication on how it's changing, the schedule is printed and it's easy to look at, but the communication on doses and things has been a little sketchy. They've kind of like embellished a little bit, if you will. The changes actually look like it's down from 72 doses on the original schedule to now around 38 doses on the recommended schedule, which is a good change. And doses not being the amount of shots a child gets actually, but the doses given, meaning like some shots have combined dosing. So you might get one injection that involves 3 different doses. So doses being actual doses of different vaccines, not the amount of shots a child are given. So 72 down to, I think, around 38. All right, so I'm going to read to you just a little bit from the fact sheet straight from the CDC because there's a lot of information floating around. I've pulled in several videos, like I said at the beginning, that we're going to go through and just kind of debunk some of the things that pediatricians are saying online, or rather, some of it will be debunking and some of it will just be like, this is what they're actually saying. But I'm going to read from this just so we know exactly what the CDC says, because a lot of times these articles are written or there's videos made, and then you go to what the CDC says and you're like, wait, this is kind of different than what we're hearing out in public, because they want you to just listen to the news and not read from the source so that you have a skewed idea so they can form your opinion about what's happening to the one that meets their narrative, essentially. So this says, after a scientific review of the underlying science comparing the U.S. child and adolescent immunization schedule with those of peer-developed nations, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Acting Director Jim O'Neill has updated the U.S. child immunization schedule. The CDC will continue to recommend that all children are immunized against 10 diseases for which there is an international consensus, as well as varicella or chickenpox. For other diseases, the CDC will recommend immunization for high-risk groups and populations or through shared clinical decision making. So this is risk-benefit analysis. This is informed consent. When it's not possible for public health authorities to clearly define who will benefit from an immunization. The updated schedule is in contrast to the CDC childhood and adolescent schedule at the end of 2024, which recommended 17 immunizations for all children. All right. So it says they recommend all vaccines for which there is a consensus among peer nations, allows for more flexibility and choice with less coercion by reassigning non-consensus vaccines to high-risk groups like we talked about. It's saying that they're accompanying this by strengthening vaccine research through HHS's commitment to double-blind, placebo-controlled randomized trials, as well as more observational studies to evaluate long-term effects of individual vaccines and the vaccine schedule. Anybody who is bucking that is just crazy. Like, I don't know why anybody would be upset with that specific part. There's probably a reason they're not talking about that much online, because if you talk about that, you have to admit that there are not double-blind, placebo-controlled randomized trials at this point, and you have a hard time promoting to people why you would be against more testing. So scientific review, you're hearing a lot of, there's no science behind this. So in 2024, the U.S. recommended more childhood vaccine doses than any other peer nation, and more than twice as many as some in European nations. A 2024 comparison between the U.S. and peer nations found that countries without vaccine mandates had as high immunization rates as the U.S. and other countries with vaccine mandates. This is a particularly interesting one. Trust in U.S. public health declined from 72% to 40% between 2020 and 2024, coinciding with a public health failure during the pandemic, including COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Though the COVID-19 vaccine was recommended for all children on the CDC schedule, the uptake rate was less than 10% by 2023. The uptake rate for other childhood vaccines declined during the same time period. So this shows that recommendations do not necessarily correlate with uptake, and recommendations also don't correlate with trust. Large placebo-controlled randomized trials on individual vaccines, combinations of vaccines, and vaccine schedules, as well as observational studies, are needed to better inform patients, parents, and providers and help restore trust in public health. And I find it interesting and noteworthy that they said that we need to better inform providers as well and didn't leave them off the list. I think that's great. So there's a lot to say here. There is a lot to say. One thing I want to know is it's been a popular saying that I didn't sign up to co-parent with the government, but I think we need to note that you may not feel like you're co-parenting with the government anymore, but if you go to a pediatrician, you are still fighting a politicized system. And so I'm going to show you some videos, or if you're watching, and have you listen to some videos if you're listening, and kind of unpack some of what the American Academy of Pediatrics is promoting out, what some of the online influencer pediatricians are saying, and just talk through some of these topics. And we're going to go through Hep B a little bit independently as well. All right, so here is the first one.
Changes to the vaccine schedule. You're about to see this a lot in the headlines. I'm a doctor of internal medicine and pediatrics, so let's talk about the childhood vaccine schedule without fear tactics and without pretending one size fits all, because it doesn't. Vaccine schedules are not random, and they are not the same around the world on purpose. Since different countries have different population sizes, disease exposures, and risks, in the United States, where we have over 330 million people, high population density, and constant travel, vaccine recommendations are designed to protect children early and when they are most vulnerable, and to protect communities at the same time. That's why organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics do not base guidance on opinions or trends, but on decades and decades of scientific evidence and real-world data showing what actually prevents kids from getting seriously ill. You'll often hear comparisons to countries like Denmark, but Denmark has about 6 million people, while the United States has more than 50 times that. Different population size means different exposure risk and different public health needs. So the schedules are not not interchangeable. If you're a parent trying to make the best decision for your child, do not rely on social media hot takes. Follow the science, follow the experts who do this for a living, and follow the American Academy of Pediatrics, because your child deserves protection based on evidence, not based on fear. As a parent and a physician, I know this is extremely challenging, and I'm sorry you are seeing so many different opinions, but let's lean on the science and let's listen to the experts.
Okay. A lot to unpack there, but the end of it just like makes me cringe. It's like an appeal to your emotions. Like, I'm sorry you're seeing so many different opinions. What is wrong with seeing so many different opinions? Like, as a parent, I want to hear all sides to be able to make my decision. But when he starts off that, he tells you you're seeing so many opinions on social media while he's putting his opinion on social media. I know he thinks he's justified because he's a pediatrician, and he is. He can put his opinion on social media, but he's like downplaying everybody else's opinion. He tells you at the beginning, though, that vaccines are not one size fits all. Then he goes on to defend a schedule that is absolutely one size fits all. I mean, these people do not see, and maybe they do see, and they just think that we are too dumb to see it. But I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and just say that they do not see the contradictions within their statement. He's trying to use one size fits all as like, we can't have the same schedule as Denmark or these other countries because we're a bigger country. But let's talk about COVID again. I live in a very rural community, and I was practicing in a college town, but it's still rural compared to New York City. And we were under these same restrictions as New York City, sitting there for months, calling nurses off because we had no patients in the hospital, and people were denied treatment. They were denied life-saving care for chronic issues and things going on, all in the name of COVID. So doctors have lost trust. The medical system has lost trust for a reason. And now they're talking about things like one size fits all without ever going back and discussing the fact that they used one size fits all so heavily during COVID. And simultaneously, they're telling you this isn't one size fits all. And still, when we talk about vaccines and risks and benefits and all of these things, every individual is different. And he's talking about travel and everything. There are some people that do not travel out of their rural communities. Are we speaking to them differently? There's a lot in that video that is just simply a blanket statement for everyone. And so it's really frustrating to watch these doctors talk about this and use things, use languages and phrasing to try to get you to think one thing when really they're saying another. All right, so this is from American Academy of Pediatrics, just some things that they posted. I'm just going to read through. It says we have very different levels of health and protection based on zip codes. It's kind of that conversation again, like not everybody is the same. And they're saying this isn't a partisan issue. All right, this one says fact check, U.S. vaccine recommendations are appropriate for children in the United States. Read why the U.S. follows specific pacing guidelines. So I'm going to read through all these. I'm going to see if you pick up on the most interesting one. How often and how many vaccines children in the U.S. receive is based on the times when vaccines will work best with the children's immune system. It also takes into account when children are most vulnerable to certain diseases. Vaccine recommendations are largely based on a population's risk of exposure to a disease and how that disease impacts health. Certain vaccines are not available in every country, which can lead to nuances in vaccine schedules, especially for combination vaccines. Some countries also may consider how to best incorporate immunizations into routine health visits. Where and when these routine visits occur may differ by country and therefore impact the immunization schedule. It's difficult to predict which children will get seriously ill from vaccine-preventable diseases, so choosing to skip or delay some vaccines is risky. Okay, so two of these I found particularly interesting, but one of them really. This last one, it's difficult to predict which children get seriously ill from a vaccine-preventable disease. Isn't it also difficult to predict predict which children are going to have an adverse reaction. So shouldn't this be a little bit of the parent's choice? But this is the thing you need to remember, that the medical system largely avoids the topic of adverse reactions. They almost deny it even exists with vaccines. Other medications, blood products, we are looking for adverse reactions. We are documenting, but with vaccines, we just pretend like it doesn't happen because it's easier to get people to just comply if we think that the only issue is the disease, not the vaccine. There can't be any risk with that. Okay, some countries may also consider how to best incorporate immunization into routine health visits. This one is interesting for two reasons. America does that, okay? And they put some countries, like America doesn't do that, but some countries might. And that is interesting that they try to kind of distance themselves from doing that. But America is a country that schedules their vaccines around routine childhood visits. Okay, so another thing we're going to talk about is the Hep B vaccine really quick. Hepatitis B vaccine, they moved from recommending a birth dose to recommending a dose at 2 months. They're like, babies don't need this at birth. And there's a couple things that are really good to pick up on here. So I'm going to play 2 videos, then we're going to talk about it.
Over 40 major medical organizations issue a joint statement. We should probably pay attention. This recent statement is criticizing the recent vote by the CDC's Vaccine Advisory Committee and essentially warning the public about this change in the recommendation that all newborn infants should get a Hep B vaccine at birth. According to the statement, this meeting seemed less about science and advancing vaccine policy and more about casting doubt in vaccines and the schedule, because no new data was presented to justify downgrading this recommendation. And these decisions, they just add to public confusion, which then adds to vaccine hesitancy, which can then lead to more illness. Here's the reality. Hepatitis B is a serious viral infection that can lead to long-term chronic complications, especially if somebody gets it in infancy. And even if a baby is born to a mother who is Hep B negative, they can still get exposed from a grandparent, a friend, another adult, a sibling, anyone who may have Hep B and not even know it, be asymptomatic. And it only takes a microscopic amount of blood, something that can be passed from casual contact, a scratch, a nail clip, or a bite, anything. The point of the birth dose is to make sure that all infants are put on the path towards lifelong immunity. And experts warn that a risk-based approach, which failed in the past, may lead to more missed cases, more infections, and ultimately more chronic hepatitis B, something that we can prevent. We've proven we can. Why change a good thing?
Okay, this one too.
I can pretty much guarantee that these babies are not doing drugs and having sex. And while that is a way that a lot of adults end up getting infected, generally infants are exposed to hepatitis B through casual contact of blood or bodily fluids in their environment. It can live on surfaces for up to 7 days, and it doesn't take much to be infected. Most of the adults that have hepatitis B don't have any symptoms, and about 67% of them don't know that they have the virus either. Somewhere between 730,000 and 2.2 million people in the United States have hepatitis B, so it is not something that is rare. The CDC's recommendation about the hepatitis B vaccine at birth has changed, but really nothing else has. There's no new evidence. The risk is still the same. There's no cure for hepatitis B. Babies are still at high risk, and you can still get it through casual contact. So the AAP and every pediatrician I know is still recommending the same thing, to get the hepatitis B vaccine at birth.
All right, that was Dr. BeachGem10 on Instagram. And the other video was just through the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I can't tell what his actual name is. But anyway, pediatrician through American Academy of Pediatrics. And the first video I played for you was Dr. Tommy Martin. That was the first video I played. If you're watching, he was wearing the bike outfit, as in riding a bicycle. Okay. So let's talk about that a little bit. One thing I want you to pick up on is casual contact. So they're telling you there's no new science. They're telling you the CDC has no new science, and they're not recommending the birth dose anymore. And so nothing has changed. Okay, you do not need new science. You do not need new information in order to make a change if the original decision was not good. So we don't need new information to change, because all the evidence is pointing to this being a proper stance. Like, birth dose is not necessary so long as you are testing mothers. And the thing is, they've left out that the CDC also did promote or re-recommend or basically reinforce a recommendation to make sure mothers are being tested for hepatitis B prior to giving birth. And so that if that is happening largely, we can do a really good job of stratifying risk and understanding who is at risk here. And so these pediatricians used to say that the reason that every child needed a dose of hepatitis B at birth was because we just don't know who's at risk. That was their rationale. Well, they've moved the goalpost, and now they're saying that it can be spread through casual contact, and that this is why every baby needs a dose of hepatitis B at birth, because you can just get it through like nail clipping or a bite or just slobbering on some toys that somebody, or putting a toy in your mouth that somebody had touched that had hepatitis B. And we're denying the fact also that 2-month-olds aren't like just picking things up and birth to 2 months, not picking things up and putting things in their mouth a lot. But they're saying this casual contact thing. We're hearing this a lot. But is that true? The Hepatitis B Foundation has on their website a page specifically noting what parents should do who have hepatitis B positive children and are sending them to school. They tell you on that page that you do not need to notify anyone at the school. It is not mandated that you tell anyone that your child has hepatitis B. If this is something passed through casual contact, don't you think that you would have to notify the school that your child has this disease? It can be so easily spread to any other child. Probably, but you don't have to. And they go another step and tell you and remind you, if you are a parent sending a hepatitis B positive child to school and you do choose to disclose your child's underlying condition to the school, remind them that it is not passed through casual contact. So you don't get people scared. And so you don't have your child basically, pushed off to the side or people scared of interacting with your child. And so it can't be, two things can't be true. It can't be passed through casual contact on one pediatrician site and not through the other. One of these is a fact. And I would tend to lean with the fact is it's not passed through casual contact, and that these pediatricians and the American Academy of Pediatrics has just moved the goalpost. And the first pediatrician talking about hepatitis B that was in that video, the man, he basically said out loud, the reason that they are pushing for the hepatitis B vaccine is because they're scared, if they are honest with you, that it will cause confusion, and backtracking on one vaccine is going to make parents question the rest of the vaccines. They're basically saying, we're willing to not be real honest with you on this one because you might start questioning the others. And I think that's a real problem. And I think what he said is absolutely right at the beginning, that when 40 medical organizations come out with a statement in support or against something, you need to pay attention. You need to pay attention that they're not willing to offer risk-based medicine and individualized care. They want to blanket everyone. That is something worth noting. We should be paying attention to that. All right, when I'm online now and I see people talking about a health need or a household need, I see Rocasa mentioned in the comment section, like everywhere I go. And there's a reason. They have great products. Rocasa Organics is a clean, natural company providing products for your household, be it like home cleaning products, to laundry and soaps and things like that, to body products and hormone kits that help you balance your hormones. They have just such an array of products. They have things for this time of the year when your family is getting sick. Their elderberry syrup, I know, is a huge hit. I like the sinus spray. I like that a lot for if I'm getting a headache or something, and then just for the actual need of like clearing my sinuses. They have all kinds of products to meet your needs all in one place. That's what I love. Like, people go to Amazon because it's really easy and they can get things all in one place. But Rocasa Organics is like the Amazon of personal care and household cleaning products, except for they're a small business and you can feel good supporting them and they have good values. So if you haven't tried Rocasa Organics yet, go to rocasaorganics.com, use the code BOOMCLAP to save 20% on your first order. And if you have already ordered from Rocasa Organics, just keep an eye out for their sales, get attached to their email or their Facebook group so that you can be involved and know when they have good sales coming up so you can stock up on their great products. All right, this one is about Florida getting rid of their mandates. So this doctor is talking about this, and I'll look up her name for you. Let's see, Dr. Leah Rapp. And so this is her Instagram as well.
I would never recommend as a pediatrician to get rid of all the sprinklers in all elementary schools just because we haven't really needed them lately. By the time there was actually a fire, it would be too late. Today in Florida, they took away the mandate for vaccines for public schools, which to me is a wild mess of a public health problem. For decades, immunizations and vaccines have prevented things like measles, rubella, diphtheria, whooping cough, catastrophic diseases for children. Vaccines aren't about politics. They're a public health strategy to prevent sparks from turning into full-blown epidemics. Also, dare I say that policy decisions like this in just the state of Florida doesn't just stop at their borders. Outbreaks travel. We should all be angry.
So I love the use of analogies to prove a point, and I use analogies a lot. I like that, but they have to be proper and they have to be equivalent. Sprinklers are to fire what treatments are to disease, not vaccines. A sprinkler is something that is there, not in use, never has to do anything unless there's a fire. The only time it does something is if there's a fire. A treatment, be it medication or a therapy, is also there, not being used, just waiting, available if there is a disease. So treatments and sprinklers would be a proper equivalent. Vaccines, however, are in use doing something in your body immediately upon injection. They're initiating a reaction in your body. So you could say a sprinkler is maybe sitting there like laying in wait, and your vaccine worked and then it's laying in wait. But the analogy has to start at the beginning. The vaccine already had to do something, unlike a sprinkler. So a better analogy, if she wants to use this fire analogy, would be like spraying your house down with water and making everything wet and all the contents in it. So in case there was a fire, everything would be damp and wouldn't burn easily. Or you could say putting flame retardants on everything. I think this is a really good analogy. Flame retardants on everything in your house in case of a fire. The flame retardant isn't really doing anything. It's just laying there in wait just in case, just like a vaccine would be, but it's toxic and possibly making you sick. So we have to use proper analogies. I just really wanted to put that one out there because I think, I'm guessing she hasn't thought that it's an improper analogy. I don't think she was trying to fool anyone, but it's not a correct and equivalent analogy to prove her point. Okay, the last video I want to play is from Ruben Allergy. I know this guy really bothers me on Instagram, but he's talking about the funding being pulled. And I think this is a really major step, is the funding, because funding has the ability to actually change things. When we talk about the CDC schedule as a whole, when we talk about hepatitis B, you're going to be going to pediatricians if you're going to a typical pediatrician, and nothing is going to necessarily change. This is one thing that we need to drive home, is the CDC and the medical community are deeply divided. And governments like Illinois, the state I live in, Governor Pritzker has already passed legislation or put forth at least legislation. I think he actually signed the bill into law already. I need to check on that. But actually saying that their vaccine advisory committee can make their own decisions and override what the federal government did. So there's a lot of celebration online about these steps being made, and that's good. I think that all of these steps are good. So I do not want to take away from that. It's steps in the right direction. But the mandates are still going to be there. Your kids in most states, unless you live in Florida right now, are still not going to be able to attend public school without a religious exemption, philosophical exemption, or something like that. And if you live in California or other states like New York, you're not going to be able to attend school even wanting to have an exemption because exemptions aren't available. The mandates are still there, and your pediatricians are still not going to necessarily be offering this true informed consent. So you still are in the driver's seat as a parent. You're still going to have to know what's going on, but reimbursements are where it's at. We could see some moving of the needle possibly with reimbursements changing. So he's going to talk about this just a little bit.
This is really bad. Health and Human Services has abruptly canceled millions of dollars worth of grants that were awarded to the American Academy of Pediatrics for various endeavors, such as identifying autism early, improving adolescent health, identifying fetal alcohol syndrome, and reducing sudden infant death syndrome. This is according to the Washington Post, and they obtained letters from the Department of Health and Human Services trying to justify removing millions of dollars of funding, saying that it wasn't aligned with their mission. They also pointed towards the language that was used in some of these grants, such as pregnant people and discussing racial disparities. This is completely ridiculous. It seems vindictive to me because the American Academy of Pediatrics, along with other medical organizations, have been speaking out against RFK Jr. and his leadership because he is actively dismantling our public health infrastructure and our research endeavors. As a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics, I stand with them in the work that they do. We need to speak out against this because this will ultimately harm children and not make America healthy again.
Okay, so is this vindictive or is this pro-science? Because the American Academy of Pediatrics absolutely does use this gender affirming care language and support that. And he says, like they've talked about the language they use and pregnant people and all of this stuff. Well, do we want to be giving money to organizations that are anti-science? We just listened to all these pediatricians cite that they're pro-science and they're against the CDC changes that aren't using science. But then these organizations don't use science. They're okay with made up terms and affirmations to make people feel good that aren't based in science when it's part of their political ideology. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, this is from 2023. They have a thing on their website. AAP reaffirms gender affirming care policy and authorizes systematic review of evidence to guide patient updates. They're totally for this. I mean, this is proper appropriation or disappropriation of our tax dollars to organizations that are, in fact, anti-science, as it seems the American Academy of Pediatrics is. So the other thing is they keep saying that, I've watched several videos just like that one where they're saying like, this is bad for kids, this is bad for patients because it's going to take away care from patients. But the American Academy of Pediatrics doesn't actually directly care for kids or patients. They're saying like they participate in evidence-based studies and things to decide what best practices are for kids. So it's not really removing money from direct patient care. As far as I can tell, I could be wrong, but I can't find anything that tells me the American Academy of Pediatrics rather directly cares for children in any way, shape, or form. It's more just allocating dollars to an organization that puts forth their agendas and their studies and things like that. The last thing I want to talk about the CDC and a change they made, they basically flipped the food pyramid upside down. RFK did this, and it was a good thing. Ruben, that guy we just listened to, had a post about it, basically saying that it was a joke because RFK posted that South Park video where they're like memeing him essentially flipping the food pyramid upside down. He's like, these people don't even know when they're being made fun of, and RFK is being made fun of. Well, it's kind of worthy of making fun of this Allergy Rubin guy for, there's so many things that he could legitimately say and be concerned with from his perspective. I may not agree, but from his perspective, I can at least understand where he's coming from. But being worried about the food pyramid changing just tells me this is 100%. I mean, we already knew that, but it's 100% a political agenda on the part of these pediatricians when they're complaining about the food pyramid changing. And we have 1 in 5 children in America who are obese. Okay. The food pyramid needs a change. I really don't care about the food pyramid from the perspective of like, I don't need the government telling me how to eat, but the government does direct the meals for millions of children in America who are going to public schools and the military and other organizations that are under the umbrella of allocating tax dollars to meals for people. Okay. But that said, Bill Schindler on Instagram, he does basically like a carnivore type, I might be wrong on that, but it's like basically animal-based diet. And he posted, I really appreciated this because I feel like I'm always the one that's like, okay, guys, this is good, but don't celebrate. And people are like, why can't you just be happy, Rita? But he posted a picture of the food pyramid and flipped upside down and says, all that glitters is not gold. And basically he's like, this is good. This needed to happen. But the food pyramid shows protein forward, whole foods emphasize, less focus on refined carbs. And that's good. But he says the image changed more than the policy. The guidelines themselves still say less than 10% of calories can come from saturated fat, which is the same limit as before. And so I'm wondering if the guideline wording hasn't changed yet, if that's something to come, if that was like overlooked, or if that's still staying and what we're going with. And the visual is the only part that changed. We'll just have to wait and see on that. But like we said before, Bill Schindler is noting that this is required for schools, hospitals, and militaries. And so when you have saturated fat at 10% of the calories, his point is like, you can't do that much meat, as much meat as you need to meet this food pyramid, or whatever. I don't know what you call it now that it's not technically a pyramid, but it's upside down pyramid, I guess. But in order to meet the guidelines the pyramid lays out, you cannot keep your saturated fat under that 10% of the diet. And so I looked up for a 2,000 calorie diet. I think that was about, for a 2,000 calorie diet, if you want to keep your intake of saturated fat under 10%, that'd be about 13 grams of saturated fat. And so, for example, for a steak, that would leave you eating around 3 to 4 ounces of lean steak, would get you to about half of your fat intake for the day. And just for an example, an average filet is about 6 to 8 ounces. So if you ate a filet, that would be your entire saturated fat for the day. So basically, his comment is it's going to be really hard to meet the standards of the current food pyramid, which are good, with the current actual written guidelines for the schools and military to abide by. So just another thought on that, something to think about. All of these things, like I said, are good steps in the right direction, but there's a lot to unpack when it comes to reality, because things on paper can always look one way. And then when you go actually participate in the healthcare field, which is largely taken over by people with one political leaning, especially after COVID, things are going to look different than you think they're going to look, because I just see like, it's like the White House is over here doing their thing and the medical community is like, we're doing our own thing. And I'd be fine with that. But it's just all become so politicized, and they're standing there telling you it's not political, and it clearly is. So, I mean, when you're just against everything somebody does that is obviously good, I understand the vaccine thing, it's indoctrination, I understand that. But the food pyramid change, I mean, that just lays their cards right out on the table. So I don't know. The vaccine conversation is something I'd like to get in more here, because I just think it's had so horribly across the board, because very, very few want to be real about it. It's presented on one side as you can just get this injection and not be sick, and ignoring the other potential illnesses that might ramp up in your body because you got this injection. You just don't want to even look at that. And then the other side that's maybe opposed to vaccines or more cautious about them at least, often acts like in order to decline a vaccine or say you don't want to get vaccinated, you have to downplay the diseases that they prevent, and have this kind of abnormal hubris that they're nothing to fear, or even like at least have some level of healthy respect for. So I just feel like there's two sides that kind of like don't often see the full picture. And then the way they're created, the way vaccines are created, like using the fetal cell lines we talked about at the end of the year on an episode with Ellie, the infectious disease scientist, like that's largely ignored as part of the conversation. And so I think that as we go forward talking about this, because there's going to be more conversations, this isn't the end of the road. These CDC changes aren't the end all be all for everything. And if the other party wins an election down the road, I mean, these are just going to be changed right back, these recommendations. And mandates are likely going to get harder and stronger in states that are opposed to these changes. So we could potentially be seeing more effects and more harsh consequences for not being vaccinated. So this is stuff we need to be talking about. But anyways, you can admit that vaccines prevent an illness that they're intended to prevent, while possibly causing or contributing to a host of other problems and creating a moral dilemma for those who are pro-life. And that's where I'm at. Like, I'm pro-life. This is a moral dilemma. I understand that when I see people get vaccinated for certain diseases, they no longer get them. But I also understand these vaccines can cause a whole host of other problems. So that's the information that I use to make my decisions from. And this world we live in is not perfect, and there are no perfect solutions. But like I said, I think both sides kind of act like there is a perfect solution. So I think as Christians, those of us who are, we often seek answers to physical issues like this in a purely physical way. And this is how I want to wrap up, just anchoring us back to how we go about listening to these things and making decisions for our family, because the CDC can make changes, the hospitals and healthcare systems can tell us something else, but the decision is still on us. We still need to seek answers. We still need to seek the best decisions for our families. So I think many of us as Christians seek these answers to physical issues and physical problems in a purely physical way. We ask questions like which decision will keep us most physically safe by not getting injections. Like, can we keep ourselves physically safe from all of these other diseases? Or by getting this injection, we're going to keep ourselves physically safe from this disease we fear. And it's a very rational stance and a very rational place to come from. But I think we'd be more honest and feel more comfortable resting in our decisions without adding abnormal amounts of confidence or guaranteed physical safety by making one choice or the other, like realizing there's still a risk we're going to face on either side. And then adding in the spiritual and moral component to these decisions. I think often we leave out that spiritual and moral component and just make our decisions on a physical basis, which one keeps us safe. And if we just ask ourselves, which decision makes most sense morally and lines up against my values and my Christian worldview, and then couple that with the risk-benefit analysis, that's part of the foundation building. That's part of being able to make educated decisions that aren't just pulled one direction or the other based on things we're hearing in the world, but pulled from a solid foundation. And so anyway, first episode of the year, think it was a little bit long, guys. I wasn't going to talk so much at the beginning, but that tax thing, I don't know. It's something that's been on my mind heavily for a really long time. And then it kind of came to the forefront. And then I'm like thinking about it in a different way. Like, it's not even going to happen. It was fun to say it when I thought it was just like me saying it. But then when I realized like people are actually thinking about it, I'm like, well, now we're just talking about it on Twitter and it's not actually going to happen. But anyway, so I got into that a little longer than I wanted to, but I did have a few other videos I wanted to play for you, but I didn't want to make it too long. We can revisit this conversation later, but lots happening within the CDC, within HHS, under RFK. I think, man, he's got to be stressed. This is a lot. But I remember at the beginning, I don't remember if it was when he was nominated or when he first joined Donald Trump at that rally, but he basically said he'd been praying for this opportunity for a very, very long time. And I imagine that now that he's in it, I wonder how it feels to be in this position and be pushing these things forward. And I know he's taking some flack from even the Maha people for not doing as much as fast, but gosh, I think he's made more changes than a lot of people, really than anybody has. So I don't know, keep praying for him and pulling for him, and that somehow we can get the healthcare world on board a little bit, not necessarily with saying they don't want to vaccinate people. Like, I don't really care so much about that, but just at least being honest that there is a risk. I think that would be a good first step. So anyways, guys, thanks for listening. Again, sorry this is a little bit long. I have some good episodes coming up for you. Please go back and listen to the old ones, share the new ones, share the old ones, leave a review. I appreciate you guys so much. You can follow me outside the podcast at RitaRogersCo.com, Rita Rogers Co on Instagram, or Boom Clap Podcast on Instagram. And you can follow on YouTube as well. See you guys next week.